Hi, everybody. This is Richard Sachs. I'm your host on Lost Arts Radio. Welcome to new people, and the rest of you, welcome back. I'm glad to be with you again. Last week, remember on our guest show, we had a guest named Celeste Bishop Solom, and she is doing a biodynamic farm in Montana in the Rockies, kind of a challenging environment. And I really thought it was great getting to visit with her. We have such great guests, and she said that it would we ever get somebody on bees? And I said, I've been looking for somebody for a long time to do a good job with that, not just bees as little, automatic instruments of making money, but actual conscious living beings. And in the modern ag education, that's not taught very much. I've been through that myself, and I know about it. And I was looking for somebody that recognized that bees, like all other life forms, are an expression of consciousness and spirit, actually. And so it got introduced to Jacqueline Freeman at spiritbee.com. I think it's .com. And yeah, spiritbee.com. And she agreed to come on the show with us, which is really exciting, and share some of her insights, really different than the conventional view of bees, and why, not just why it's important that we don't wipe them out in the current poisoning of the earth, but beyond that, their incredible contribution to the quality of life here. So welcome, Jacqueline, and I think it's going to be a fun conversation.
Thank you.
What I'd like to do to start is go back before you were involved in this stuff, to whatever point you want, so we can kind of walk back to it, so that people get to know you a little bit as a person and how you ended up in the middle of this, and then we'll talk more about what you're doing now.
I would say probably we could go back to the mid-'80s, and I was attending a long conference, a few months long, and every day at lunchtime, it was in Northern California somewhere, and every day at lunchtime I would go out, and there was a swimming pool there, and I noticed probably the first or second day I was there that there were bees that had fallen into the swimming pool, and they were trying to get out, and of course they couldn't fly up and out. So I had no relationship with bees that I was aware of at the time, but I went over and scooped them up on a stick and got a bee out and found another one and got another bee out. And I did that for 2 months, every single day.
Wow.
I found myself being the caretaker of the swimming pool, because it's just don't splash, there's a bee in the pool. And I did that. And everyone would say, come eat lunch, and I'd say, no, I can't. There's a little bee that needs me. So I think there was something that was happening there that was a lot more than I expected. I didn't have any more deep connection with bees until probably about 15 years ago. We had just bought our farm, and my husband and I bought a small farm, 10 acres in Southwest Washington. And we weren't farmers. We really were just buying a place that was in the country. I'm from a small town in England, and that was really what we were seeking to have, was a small town feel, and we certainly got that. My little community is only about 2,000 people. Really nice. I think it was my second year here that one of my friends from Portland called me up and said that a friend of hers had sold or moved into a house. I was never quite sure, but there were bees in a hive in the woods in the backyard, and they wanted them gone. And she said, "You're a farmer. You should, you have a farm. You should have," I wasn't a farmer at that point, but she said, "You should have bees." And I thought, she's absolutely right. I have plenty of room. I have flowers everywhere. I should have bees. So we went down and got the beehive, and were rather nervous setting it up because I had no experience with bees other than fishing them out of a pool. And I started my relationship with bees. It was absolutely delightful from day one. I have to admit, when I started out with bees, I was a little anxious about, getting stinged, or something like that. But I noticed that as I sat next to the bees every day, completely dressed in my protective gear, as I sat next to them every day, I noticed that, first of all, they didn't have anything at all to do with me. I was not a threat to them, and I realized they were not a threat to me. And that was kind of a awakening right there, was to see that here I am dressed up. I'm 1,000 times as big as they are, and I'm wearing protective gear, and I'm sitting up close to the hive, and I'm watching and observing, I guess. And I just felt really happy to be doing that. And they would do nothing more to me other than occasionally one would like land on my sleeve, just the way it would land on a tree branch.
Mm-hmm.
And I just started thinking about how I felt when I was there, that there was something, this was not what I anticipated. It felt different. It felt like I was there with little beings. And that was sort of a surprise.
Yeah, what everybody learns about bees these days is that they're going to sting you right away. And you have to have a spacesuit on. So when you went to rescue the hive and relocate it, why don't you tell people what that was like? Because I don't think most people have rescued a hive. And it's not a box sitting in a tree somewhere. It's an actual natural hive, right?
Well, actually, you're hitting me a little bit, because that first one was a box in the woods with bees in it. And we just wrapped it around it and brought it home. Okay. They were in a hive already. Since then, however, I have done many, many, many bee rescues and collecting swarms as well. Just taking, what I really think of it as is, when I get a call for that, it's taking bees from a place where bees ought not to be for their own safety and moving them someplace else. A lot of them came onto our farm or went to friends' farms.
So when you rescue bees like that, whether they're in a box or more likely when they're in a tree or a swarm or something like that, a lot of people are worried that if you're not really careful, you're going to get the wrong kind of bees, and that some are aggressive and some are nice. So what's the truth about that?
That is true. Sometimes they are aggressive. We had one hive that we got one time, a colony, I should call it. My husband and I got a call from, it was actually kind of funny, a gated community, and they said, you have to come right away. And so we jumped in the car and put an empty hive in the back seat and drove over. And they had at the gated community, it was one of those rolling gates where you had to stick your card in to get in and out. And the bees had to set up literally 3-4 feet from where people had to roll down their window and their card in. So traffic was just blocked. No one could go in, no one could come out, and no one was willing to come in or out. So and that was one of the biggest hives I've ever seen. They were like triple size.
Okay, so if that's not in a box, what does it look like?
It just hangs down like bees upon bees upon bees. On my website, spiritbee.com, you'll probably see some pictures of that. And they're just beautiful. Do you want me to tell you what happens, why they're swarming? Maybe that would help?
Everything that you can share, because I'm trying to give people who have no experience of this kind of thing the feel of these different bee experiences so they know what it's about.
I can do that. So inside the hive, when a hive is successful, really, really doing well, they're growing and they've got lots of honey collected and they've got lots of pollen, feed the babies, and everything is in prime success mode. At that point, they realize that they are healthy and strong enough that they can create two. That's their method of reproduction, is swarming. So what will happen is the old queen will lay some eggs for new queens, and then she and the old hive, a significant part of it, a little more than half of it, will depart. And they go out looking for a new home. It's really kind of interesting because when the bees go out like this, they have this grand sense of adventure. They leave everything behind. All the food is there. The baby eggs are laid. There's a whole crew that's going to take care of everyone until the new queen hatches. And off they go on this wild adventure to see if they find a new home. And that's when I often get calls about them is, there's a swarm of bees in my front yard in the tree, and, people blockade themselves inside houses. Like they think it's like Hollywood, like the bees come flying in and they're going to attack with stingers out. And it's completely not like that whatsoever. Instead, what it's like is just before the bees leave on their grand adventure, they all fill up their bellies with honey. They are sort of like Thanksgiving afternoon. They have not a speck of aggression in them whatsoever. They're a little bit overindulged in all the honey that they can carry. They don't know when they go to hang on a tree branch if they're going to be there for 20 minutes or for 3 days. So they stock up. And they have zero interest in stinging anybody. They're really not interested. They have nothing to protect. There's no home. There's no baby eggs. There's nothing to protect. Right. So you can, that pronoun, you can, I mean that, just as I have, actually collect them with your hands, just off of a tree branch. And you don't need equipment on it, although I will say that it took me a while to actually understand that I didn't need equipment, that no one was going to attack and sting me. The only times I've ever been stung moving a swarm of bees with my bare hands is 2 or 3 times I actually put my hands into the swarm of bees and I bumped somebody's hind end with my finger and I got stung then. Right. But that's me stinging myself with a hind end of a bee that didn't mean to be stinging.
Right.
So for the hundreds of swarms that I've moved over a decade and a half, it's extremely rare that I ever, in that I can go years without having something like that happen.
Is it true that the bee dies if it stings you?
Yeah, and they have no desire to give up their life for something as silly as Jacqueline butts her finger at them.
Right.
Now,
so,
if they're around their own colony and they're unfamiliar with you, and you're rough and tumble with them like a bear would be, then sure, that would be a time when a defense line would come out and say, we don't want this being near us.
Right. But they probably, well, this may come later in the discussion, but they probably judge the threat level by energy, I would imagine.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Combined with movement patterns and stuff too.
Yes. And if you do this when bees are around you, think of that from the bees' perspective. That's, whoa, I'm going to get swatted here. I need to sting or get out of here. This is a person who's dangerous. Whereas if you're calm moving towards them, they feel that. They're extremely perceptive little beings.
Yeah. I've noticed the same thing in working in the garden, that you can communicate with them just like you can with a person, although people don't usually know this, without saying anything, that your intent and your thought goes right to them. It actually works with people too. They're just less conscious.
Yes, I agree. Everything you said.
So if you're rescuing a hive, a swarm is different than a hive that you're rescuing. A swarm has no solid mass except for the bees, but the hive that you're relocating has some kind of mass, right? What's that made out of? It's not a box.
Well, if I catch them as a swarm, they're their own unit. They're just 20,000 bees laying on top of each other. And they do this when the queen will fly a little ways out with them, usually not more than 100 or 200 feet. And she'll she's not used to flying. Her job is to be inside the hive laying eggs.
Right.
And when she comes out, they actually, before they get ready to swarm, about a week before, they cut back on her food so that they make her a little trimmer and thinner and ready.
Right. That's great.
So they trim her up, and I've seen them when they come out. When the signal comes, they come out like water pouring out of the front of the hive. It's just incredible. And they just start, just building, and they come out as fast as they can. And there's this incredible excitement in the air. It's like I've been out in my field and just felt something. You hear a sound, it's a very specific sound, or you just feel like something, and just in that split second, it takes me to go, something, and I see, there's 20,000 bees in the air in an area about the size of my living room, and they're just doing, every bee is going in every direction. This is one of the things I find so amazing. I can go stand in the middle of 20,000 bees flying at about this speed, and no bee has ever bumped into me. No bee bumps into everybody else either. 20,000 bees. I mean, think if you put 8 people in your living room and said, now move quickly around, you couldn't keep from bumping. Right. And yet they have a consciousness that says, I know where every one of my 20,000 brothers and sisters are at this moment, and we're all moving really fast.
So you said the queen only goes out like 100 yards or so. So what happens after that? Does she get carried or what?
Oh, that would be nice.
Yeah.
And she just goes to a tree branch nearby, and she has a little that stay close around her and help guide her. They just want to make sure that the queen is with them. So she'll land on the branch, and then they all just slowly coalesce around her. And a swarm can be this big. And the queen will be somewhere deep in the middle of it. Their job, as a matter of fact, when they're swarming and you see all that activity going on, their job is actually to protect her. And it isn't by stinging or anything. It's just if you think of a bird flying overhead and looking down and going, ooh, yum, lunch.
Right.
And then I want the big fat bee.
Yeah.
So this chaos that they create is to actually visually keep anyone from knowing where the queen is. She's somewhere in the middle of that mass of bees moving in every direction. But she's
So once they all get in a clump there, do they just keep moving after that?
No, they stay right where they are. They send out a group of scouts, they're called. And the scouts go out and find where's the new home going to be. Sometimes they've done this before they even swarm. They already know that there's a tree about a quarter mile away that's got a hollow opening in it that used to have woodpeckers in it that now would be a perfect place for bees to move into.
Okay.
So they go out looking. If they haven't figured it out ahead of time, then the scouts will go out for as long as it takes. And this is another thing about their consciousness. When a bee finds, let's say, the woodpecker hole, and another one finds, the corner of your garage.
Yeah.
And somebody else finds a place that's sort of close to the ground, but it's got an opening, let's say a spare tire. Okay. So they've got these 3 different places. And what they do is that scout bee will actually go inside and they send a projection of what they're seeing and feeling. And the bees actually make an image, an internal image of what that hollow space will look like when they've completely taken it up with their comb and they're storing their nectar and laying the eggs. They see it complete. And then there's actually they see in that case, it would be 3 different sites. Each of the 3 sites completely made. In other words, they're projecting their future in the present. Right. And then all of the bees, so the whole swarm of 20,000 bees doesn't go over and check it out and come back and check it out and come back and check it out and come back. They make a decision, and a few more scouts will come and accompany them and go, this one up in the tree, that does look pretty good. It looks a lot better than this smelly tire over here.
Well, did those scouts go to the other ones, or they just went by the image?
They show up there, which I find amazing. They simply show up. There's a lot of internal communication that goes on. This imagery that I don't have to go over and grab you by the sleeve and say, come with me, Richard. I'm going to show you something over here. It's just I project this image and I say, oh, this is what this will be like. And then 20 more scout bees will come in and confirm it. And then something happens back at where the swarm is dangling from a tree a quarter mile away. And all of a sudden, these bees up and fly off and come to the new site.
Wow.
And move in.
That sounds incredibly similar to what some of the old indigenous tribes in different parts of the world who are not degenerated, like a lot of them are, they have that ability too. They communicate over distance without sound, and it's accurate, and they already understand. And then when they meet each other, they have that history that they've already gone over by projection. And it sounds like the bees are doing the same thing.
Like how I understand that's how Aborigines in Aboriginal tribes in Australia and in Africa both do that. There's an image that water is over here, And then when you are out in the desert and you need water, you know to go. It's like you're following an internal mental path that's
Right.
already been set.
Yeah, and we're so advanced now that we don't need any abilities. So it's a really different civilization, I guess you'd call it. So what the question I was getting at, which wasn't too clear, I guess, is that when you're rescuing a swarm, well, two questions. One is when you're rescuing a swarm and not a hive, but just a swarm that apparently doesn't have a hive yet, right, for a new place to live.
Yeah, to make it easier, let's say a hive is inside of a home, inside of some
Right.
kind of an enclosure.
Okay,
and it's the colony. So these are bees without
okay,
a home.
the colony doesn't have the home yet. So if you're rescuing them, are there scouts out that are going to be confused because you're moving the swarm?
That's a great question. And when I first started doing this with my husband, we would go out and we used to joke about it because we'd say we are definitely of the no bee is left behind group, because
that's what I was getting at. Yeah.
Every single bee, we would pick everyone up with a feather and, join them to it and wait for the little scout bees to come back too, because it's quite likely that those two other groups that went off to the spare tire in the corner of the garage, they got bumped. And, the swarm just said, we are going to this is where we're going to move into. We're going to go here.
Wow.
Now, these bees, it may take them a while to get back, but they can actually come back to the site. And the queen has a very powerful pheromone. Her scent it makes every bee in the hive every bee in the colony knows it. And if it's not a windy day, they can actually just simply follow the scent for a quarter mile and actually rejoin themselves with them.
Humans don't really have a sense of smell compared to that, do they?
No, but there was a thing that happened to me one day when I was in the kitchen and I stood up and I bumped my head on the bottom of a open shelf, open cabinet door. And it was no big deal. I didn't hurt myself badly or anything. But a short time later, all of a sudden my scent, my ability to smell came on like unbelievable. It was like I could smell layers of scent. I could smell like a dog smelled. I could smell like my cow out in the field. I could tell the striations of grass. This grass is ready. This is not quite ready. This has a little bit sweeter smell to it. It was amazing. I could smell 1,000 things that day. And it went away. By the end of the day, it drifted off and I went back to normal human smellability. But wow, what an amazing capacity. So I can understand how a bee can follow a scent for a quarter mile, because that scent is just laying in the air out there.
Yeah, and it let you know that humans do have that ability. It's just turned off for some reason.
Somewhere in my brain, that just clicked on and went, this is what's available to you. I wish I knew how to do it.
Yeah, and if that's what's possible with smell, what's possible with everything else, including senses we don't know about yet. But a question that came up while you were telling that story is, the bee can follow a scent like the queen scent if there's no wind for a quarter mile or whatever. How much distance can they follow a projection image?
I think that's there are other layers of perception, and it's like interstellar. It's when a bee, this brings on another story.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so when a bee, so remember the hive we left behind that the swarm went out and found their new home and they left behind these bees?
Yeah.
Well, in there's a queen egg that hatches that's going to become the new queen for that swarm, because they're left motherless when the old queen left.
Right.
So she hatches usually it's about a week after the swarm leaves. She hatches out, and nature does this multiple bee egg thing. In case one is damaged, there's actually 12 to 20 eggs laid, because somebody will be strong enough. And some of the research that's being done, it's interesting because I've had access to some information, and then, whoa, lo and behold, science catches up, and 2 years later they say, hey, we just learned this thing that so many of them I'm sure you're aware of. Anyway, with bees, one of them is, why do they make so many of them? Well, inside that hive, the bees, the maidens, the females that are taking care of the little queen eggs there, they actually can smell again the health of the eggs. So they'll start to pay more attention to certain eggs and less attention to others, which I'm convinced is certainly they're saying these ones are stronger and these ones are not. So we're just going to let those go by the way. Anyway, one of the bees will hatch out and there'll be mating day. And this is such an incredibly beautiful story. This virgin queen comes out, and when she comes out, she'll come out, she needs about 5, 6, 7 days to kind of mature after she's hatched to be capable of becoming pregnant. Mm-hmm. In the meantime, we have these drones, the boy bees. Mm-hmm. There's only 10% of the hive is the boy bees. They have different tasks, completely different tasks, not the tasks of taking care of the hive like the females do. The females are called workers, is what we humans call them. Yeah. But a friend of mine one time said, I have a hard time believing that they'd call them like workers, like, being known as your job is not the same as being known for who you are. And I asked them one time, and I'm going on a sideways tangent here for a minute, but I thought it was so interesting. Yeah. Normally when I get information from bees, it just comes to me. It isn't like I sit down and ask a question. Frankly, I don't think I have perceptive enough questions so that they just tell me something and I write it down and then we have our communication. But I asked them, I said, are you actually, what do you call the females? We call them workers, but is that what you call them? And they completely ignored me. They explained something about sound. And I thought, that was very interesting. It didn't answer my question, but that's interesting. The next day I said, maybe I'll try asking him again. So I asked him again, and they explained something else about the way vibration moves. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to ask him again. They have no interest in answering this question. So the third day, they simply explained it to me. What they said is that bees live there the first 16, they only live about a month and a half, each individual bee. The first third of their life is completely spent inside of the hive. They don't come out they're living in darkness, but they do all of the tasks that the hive requires of them to take care of that bee family. And then on about day 16 or so, that bee comes outside and she stands on the front entrance there and she looks out at this whole wide world. And then from that moment on, she's a forager. She goes out and collects pollen and nectar and comes back, and then the bees take care of it. So what they told me was, we call her a sound that's the reverse of the sound of Om. Humans make this Om sound because we live in this broad, wide world. We live in this, this whole experience of out here. And we actually have to teach ourselves and learn to come internal. We have to learn how to come inside. Right. So we have the experience of the sound of Om out here, Om, and then we bring it into ourselves, that Om, that embracing, come back to your home. Right. The maidens, the name that they're known by is the reverse of the sound of Om, because they start internal and then they come out into the whole world. So you can make that sound like the mwah. That's the sound. And they said, but you can call them maidens. What I found so interesting was that they actually needed to explain sound and vibration first so that I could actually understand what the answer was 3 days later.
This is a really interesting story because I hope I can explain it right. What just struck me is that what you explained is a microcosm or an example of how you're talking. Your site is called Spirit Bee, right? SpiritBee.com and all that. Because we're really talking about forms of spirit, because in a way in the world that's all there are, and just different kinds. And humans are possibly the most confused, but they have a lot of potential. And when they ask for answers to a question, if they're conversant with the concept of asking spirit in its conscious form for explanation of some knowledge or something, a lot of times they'll think in the beginning, well, I'm just going to hear this voice and it's going to say, first you do this and then you do that, and this is what it means, and here's going to be your test, and everything that is just like in school. And what happens from my experience and what I've heard from a lot of other people is that you ask a question, and if you're focused enough on it and you really want to know, because people have heard that whatever you ask you get told, and it's true, but not instantly in words. And what can happen is all the experiences that come to you once you really get focused on that question are getting you ready to be able to comprehend the answer. And that's exactly what you just described. Pretty interesting. Yeah, but it starts immediately.
I went a little tangential to my story about bees. So this queen who comes out in the front entrance, she's looking to get mated. Every morning about 11 o'clock, there's the funniest thing that happens outside the front of each of the hives. You'll see all of a sudden there's this tumble of the male bees, the drones, who come out and they fly off to what science calls the drone congregation areas. The bees have different words for them. They call it a scarp. And there's a light, a lumen that comes through it. And each of these boy bees, the drones, there may be one area that's a mile in that direction. And so maybe 20 of the bees from this hive will go there. Another 30 bees will go off to, the drones will go off to one here. They go off to all of these drone congregation areas in all different directions. And what they do, these exist they're about 2, 3, 4, even 500 feet high. And the drones just fly these lemniscates, they fly these figure eights in there, starting at about 11 in the morning. And they're waiting for the virgin queens to show up. And when they do this, the queens come out. Now, the virgin queens come out. They have never been a mile in that direction. They've never been anywhere. Right. They come out and they look, and they have these big, beautiful eyes, and they look and they see the lumen. They see the light that's emanating from it. The bees say that this is like an earth acupuncture point where these lumens are above them. We have one that's near our farm, and I'll tell you how I can tell as soon as I finish this.
Okay.
So the queen comes out. Sometimes she'll take a few of the maidens with her, and they kind of, run a little protection around her. Mm-hmm. And she flies off to one of these lumens, and she comes in real low, comes in like just maybe 60 feet from the ground. And then all of a sudden turns up and just flies straight up as fast and as high as she can. And when she flies up this like kind of cone, the drones all of a sudden get this whiff of virgin queen pheromone. Right. And it's like, whoa, this is what we live for. And they take off chasing her. The first one who catches up to her. So first of all, there's this wonderful thing that happens where only the strongest, fastest drones can catch up to her and mate and give their seed. So it isn't anything like when we breed bees and we can't tell who's a strong drone from anybody else. So that's just a mistake humans make, thinking we can do better than this. But this is the way it happens. So the queen flies, a drone catches up to her, and he inserts his penis into her, and she has a pump that actually pulls the sperm into her at the same time as the drone is offering it. And then he falls back in his little throes of ecstasy. He's fulfilled his true mission on Earth. He falls back, and his penis actually breaks off, and it's still inside of her, and he falls to Earth. And this is how I know where there's a drone congregation area, because I found little tiny drone bodies with a broken off penis that obviously they fell from a great height and landed here. And I found a few of them in that one area. So I know that's one of the earth acupuncture points. Anyway, the next drone that catches up catches up and he removes the penis and inserts his, and they continue on. And she'll mate with 10, 12, 20 different drones, and she gets a whole different bunch of sperm samples from that will be used for. One of the things, a drone doesn't have a stinger because he has a penis instead. And when this drone is flying, I think one of the things that's so funny about it is a drone he can't mate anytime except when he's in that beautiful earth acupuncture point, that lumen, because his penis doesn't work until he actually gets some G-force. So when he's flying and chasing and flying as fast and hard as he can, the G-force actually pushes his penis out and makes it available for breeding. So when the queen reaches the top of this and goes, okay, that's enough, I have enough sperm in me, and she turns and flies off, there's no point in this drone's chasing her because there's no G-force in that kind of a chase. Isn't that fascinating?
Wow, that is incredible. So I haven't seen that in any bee books either.
Now, the part I was actually answering one of your questions here too, because when she gets to the top of the lumen and she's already mated with all of these drones, that's the point when she sends her message out. And this message goes, I don't know what you call it, intergalactic, interdimensional. Probably interdimensional is a good word for it. It says, this is the state of the earth. This is the state of this place, this being, this place where our colony lives. This is the state of bees in the world. There's an immense message of the state of development that we're in right now, and that gets sent out into the cosmos at the top of that.
Well, tell me a little bit more detail. State of development of what exactly? Is it like the State of the Union address for that bee colony?
Yes, and more. It's actually, this is where this particular colony is existing, and also this is where all bees are, and this is the planet. This is where we are at this moment. So it's kind of like
state of the earth from that bee's perspective.
Yeah.
Wow.
So they have a role, and when doing that emanation that comes out, that's what brings the mating of the bees in that cone of light, is what stimulates the earth acupuncture point and continues the world. You just got that, didn't you? You just got that. I can see how the look on your face.
Yeah, I'm absorbing it. It's not something I was aware of. So that's pretty neat. It's almost like everything in nature has a really deep function that we barely have any idea of. Yeah. Yeah. Including us, of course.
It's so crucially important to the ongoing development of the world. There's some, in the way that the world is run, this is an answer to a question that's being asked in the world. And the bees fly with that answer, and they give it. So I think it's really important that we have bees for many, many, many reasons, but that's one of them, because they deliver a communication that's like a constant monitoring of the state of development that we are in here as a whole. I don't mean just as a species, I mean of all species.
It's funny how proud humans are of their barely conscious state. That the fact that they're perceiving everything so superficially, they're almost unconscious. And they're saying, yeah, bees are important. Our scientists confirmed it. And you have to have this many bees, because if you don't, you can't pollinate those flowers and we can't take the honey. And that's the official reason. And
what I
there's
hear
a bit more to it than that.
People say, we need to save the bees because they're responsible for half the fruit and vegetables that we eat. Like, because that's not why we need to save the bees.
Yeah.
So humans,
they're just bugs anyway, right? Yeah, bugs have no interest. So
and they have much purpose than human food and honey.
The other thing it really brings to the front is that if we, your little experience with the sense of smell and waking that up for a day is just a clue what is our fully awake state like? And every one of these life forms, like bees, for example, is trying to communicate. They're not secret. It's just our inability to perceive things that makes it seem like that.
Yeah. Yeah. They have such an ability to understand what we need too, and we're so unaware of the fact that they're working to serve that. And I mean, like, in the broad sense of humanity and all of Earth. I've had, I remember one time I went up in February just because I miss my bees. They're very quiet in the winter, and they're, they don't come out very often in winter. There's no flowers. There's nothing to do. They're in their dream time in there when they're communicating with the spirits of flowers and helping the evolution of spring come once again. Right. Anyway, I was up there one time, and I was just looking at, the entrance and sending love, just, little bees. I love you, and, all love surrounds all of us. And I was just in the midst of a little reverie, and this little bee came out. And they'll come out in the winter on a day that's not too cold, and they do a poop run. They're awake all winter, and they need to, every once in a while, defecate. So she came out, and I was like, oh, great, I got to see a bee today in February. That's wonderful. She came out, and she was about to fly up, and she turned around, and she looked at me. And I had injured myself 2 days before. We had gone to help an elderly friend who has a vineyard, and my husband and I pruned a 1/4 mile of grapevines with him. And I got to tell you, the next day, my paw hurt. Right. I did this motion 10,000 times, and it was really achy. And this bee came over, and I had been, lamenting my poor sore thumb all morning. This bee came over, and she leaped up onto my hand and just looked at me, turned and looked me straight in the eyes. And I was looking at her, and I was having one of those wonderful little bee reverie moments. And then she dipped her little hind end down and stung me. And I was just like, why would you sting me? It doesn't make any sense. Right. And then all of a sudden I realized that over the next 10 minutes, all the pain that I had in here completely went away. She came out and gave me this little healing ping. They can, by the way. She didn't have to die, by the way. If they're very careful and cautious, they can actually inject a little bit of sting.
Just barely put it in, right? Not to the barb point or something. Yeah.
So she went off, and I was healed. Wow. It was quite a moment.
Yeah, she wasn't mad at you, huh?
No, and she didn't sting me anywhere else except the place where I was in pain.
Wow.
The few times I've ever been stung, I've probably been stung, I don't know, maybe 40 times in more than 15 years. And the few times, one of them was 20 at once, and that was me being stupid about something. But all the rest of the times, it doesn't, if I get stung once or twice a year, maybe. And it's usually because I stepped on a bee barefoot, things like that. Right. But I've noticed that the few times I have been stung, they've often been in a place where I needed some healing. And I find that quite amazing, that they would look at me and see there's something out of alignment here, and I need to bring it back in alignment. So I'll focus it with a little there, and then I'm better.
Wow. And in a way, the whole message is there's a lot more happening in all directions around us and inside us and everything than we have the slightest idea right now. There's not a whole lot of reason for arrogance. So when you brought the first rescued colony back, which was in a box already, I guess, right? The very first one. Did you rebuild it or anything, or just leave it like it was?
Well, I had some empty hives, and that was what initially I used to do. But, there's been a long evolution now. I think I started keeping bees maybe 16 years ago. And every once in a while, I feel like suddenly I get a moment of progress where I go, that doesn't feel right to me to do anymore. I'm going to stop doing that. And when you work with bees in the kind of environment that we're in, where there's so much screwing up humans do when you're talking about bees, I have to pay attention to what is assumed to be true versus what actually feels like it's really true.
Right.
So I question myself constantly. If I do something, I say, am I doing this by rote? Am I doing this because someone told me that it's good?
Wow.
What is my function here? And I see a lot of my function around bees is to examine that, to look at and to listen deeply to what comes through that feels like this is more right. So now I don't have any bees that are in regular wooden hives like you'd see in a field.
Yeah.
I've left that behind. I help bees live in trees now, and I have one hive that came and lived in the north wall of my house, completely on their own.
So I think the reason that boxes have been constructed is so that people could take the honey out, right? I mean, that's the main reason.
Yes. That's absolutely true. Yes.
And the way they construct them, they're a cubicle shape, and they've got a bunch of rectangular or square frames, right, that they put in those stacked up horizontally.
All of that is so that the harvest of honey is easier.
Exactly, and they have a queen excluder, right, between between the queen and some of the frames, and that way no eggs get laid in there. They don't mess up the honey, which is created for humans.
Right, and what's so silly about that is I don't use queen excluders, and I've had hives, all different kinds of hives for many years. Rarely have I ever found that the queen, who knows that she's going to lay eggs in the nursery where the babies are, she knows better. She's not going to go up in the top part of the hive and go, here, I'll put a bunch of eggs up here. That would just be absolutely silly. So it gives, the queen excluder gives a bar where she can't get behind. And, maybe the nursery is a little domed, so there could have been a few eggs there. But really what happens, what they've said is the queen, when she's in that nursery all the time, 24 hours a day, years on end, and that's what she does. She lays the eggs. But every once in a while, she takes a walkabout, and she'll just go off and just walk up into the different parts of the hive. It doesn't happen very often. And she's laying her scent as she goes, and that scent makes everyone so happy. And I just get this image like, the queen just kind of walks through with her little entourage, and it's like, oh, the queen.
Well, you also mentioned a little phrase in that explanation, 3 words that are really in contrast to what you said before about the lifespan of the average queen that goes out to, not queen, but bee that goes out to collect nectar from flowers and pollen and stuff. They live 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And you said that the queen could be in there for years on end. So how long does the queen live?
I'm glad you picked that up. Well, if you listen to conventional beekeeping, they'll say every spring you have to kill the old queen and replace it with a new queen.
Of course.
Plugs in like to no end.
Well, nature obviously couldn't figure that out. It needed humans.
Right, without the aid of humans. The queen will live 5, 6, even as long as 7 years.
That's really interesting.
She doesn't even reach her peak egg-laying capacity till, like her 2nd, 3rd year. So what happens is that in conventional beekeeping, I learned this because when I first got that first hive, I went off to bee school a few weeks later. And bee school was just bee school. A conventional beekeeper was teaching you how to keep bees the way that conventional methods do. And we got paired up, me and another guy, and we were given a hive, and they said, we're going to do our spring preparations now. And so we're all wearing our bee suits. And so I got handed a queen in a little wooden box with a screen on it. And I was just like, whoa, I've never seen a queen up close. This is amazing. And I was just transfixed looking at her and talking to her and having a lovely. In the meantime, the guy that was my beehive partner that day, they said, look inside. We're going to find the queen in here. It's easy to find her. She's got a big bright dot magic markered on her abdomen. So you can open it up and go, oh, there she is. And it will be a different color depending on what year it is. So you can tell how old
you mean that's what the people put on her? They put a dot on. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, he finds her. And so the guy who's leading it says, okay, take out, just, pinch that old queen, take her out, and then squish her. And so he does that. I'm over here and I'm going, what? Squishing a queen? You would have thought that I could have put two and two together and go, there's a queen in there, and I've got a queen in my hand, and there's only one queen to a hive, a colony. So what's going to happen here? I didn't have that capacity. I didn't even think of it. Right. And he squished the queen, and everybody that was in bee school that day squished a queen right at that moment. And I hardly remember anything that happened the rest of the day. I kept thinking, that can't be right. That can't be right. She was perfectly healthy. And I asked later, I was like, why are we killing a queen? I thought, they can live time. And they said, oh no, she loses her fertility after a year. So we need to have her having a lot of fertility. So we replace them every year. That's standard conventional stuff. Well, wow. One of the things the bees explained to me was when the queen stays inside of her hive in the darkness, laying eggs her whole life, the only time a queen ever comes out from there is on that flight when the swarm takes to their new home. And what the bees explained to me is that when she comes out and does that flight, that the sun turns on her hormones again, and it reinforces her. Wow. I mean, doesn't this make sense?
Is there a typical amount of time that passes before each migration like that, or splitting of the colony?
Is it once a year?
It's every year? They swarm every year?
Swarm every year.
Wow.
And so if you were doing this conventionally, conventional beekeepers do not allow their hives to swarm because there's a reduction in the, how many bees are inside the hive.
Well, and they can't control where they go, I guess, right?
Well, they can't control where they're going, too. So they prevent them from swarming. They clip the queen's wings, for example. That would be one way to keep it going. Or they simply kill the queen eggs when the queen is laying the baby queen, the virgin queen eggs. They'll kill those. They'll just squish those. So the queen won't leave if there's no one to replace her.
I mean, this is just an example of the whole dark energy of humans right now. They're so out of touch. It's amazing.
The arrogance. So, in a way, I can say the conventional beekeeper is right. That queen does not have good fertility because they didn't let her come out and renew her fertility with the sun the way that nature had intended it to be.
Okay, and they want to be able to split the hive artificially and make more hives? Is that right?
Uh-huh. Yeah. But, you can do things like things that I would never do, like clip the queen's wings so she can't fly.
Right.
Well, then they're never going to leave because they won't leave her queen behind.
Yeah. And of course, these are just insects. They don't feel or experience anything. They just fly around by instinct.
Let me just answer what you just said. I'm glad you even said that sentence, because when a queen has been killed, accidentally you open up a hive and you squish her somehow.
Yeah.
Or just something happens and the queen dies.
Right.
And what happens is that hive will go into mourning, and you can actually hear them. If you split a hive and something is wrong and they don't have their queen, this is mother. This is the basic relationship is the queen and the mother queen and all her babies. Everyone she's in there with is one of her progeny. When that queen is removed for some reason, killed, whatever, the hive has a sound that comes over it. You could know absolutely nothing about bees, and you would know that this is the sound of mourning. And it's just like this, it's like this exhale of grief. And so when beekeepers kill the old queen, and then they haven't yet brought in the new queen, that's the sound you'll hear emanating from that hive. There's a panic that goes through the hive. The mother has been being cared for by a whole bunch of maidens who they're responsible for feeding her and cleaning her and all this.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, they can't find her. And there's panic. Every bee is just, if you have an observation window on the side, you'll see them running everywhere, just touching each other, going, have you seen her? Have you seen her? Where is she? I can't find her. This panic. And then there's this grieving sound. We call it a bug, and like it has no, and yet even talking about it, it almost makes me cry because I've heard that sound, and you cannot mistake it for anything but the sound of grieving.
Right. Yeah, I can feel it.
If they can't find her, that's when you introduce, that's when conventional beekeeping introduces a new queen. And at that point,
what happens then? Yeah.
They're so beaten down. They're like, oh, she's gone. And they will usually accept her and carry on with life because the true mother is gone. And it's really kind of a weird thing, too, because if the queen, when she lays those eggs, she's continuing her line. And she can fly off with the swarm, and there's some bees left behind. And the new queen has all of that DNA of everything that's been known. The drones who mate with her introduce their DNA of, here's how we find honey in a desert. One line might know that. Here's another one that says, we know how to really survive when things get super cold. Another one will say, we can get by on just about nothing. Another one will say, we know how to find the smells of orchards far in a distance. They all have their own little components of DNA. When you kill a queen, you kill that line. That line's over and done with. All that knowledge is lost. And it's heartbreaking because it's such a common procedure for conventional beekeeping. There's no respect for the fact that these lineages have come down through millennia. And each time a bee in this area, each time a queen starts up her new hive in this area, she's bringing that introduced knowledge from the DNA that's gone before her. That makes sense?
Completely. Yeah. Yeah. It's just, the message that it's conveying is something really deep. It's hard to put into words because you're just giving an example. But there's a much deeper, all-encompassing principle that I think we're supposed to get and adapt to, grow into. And I'm trying to get a hold of that.
We have a thing that we do here in America with conventional beekeeping, and even people who are not conventional, who are trying to do it organic and all. There's a certain method where you get bee breeders, and bee breeders there's no chase to the heavens for breeding. This is the next drone that comes along. There's an artificial insemination that you take that sperm and you inject it into that queen. And I've seen the pictures of these queens. What they do is they take the virgin queens and they put her in a little, it's like a little thing where just her hind end is sticking out, a little enclosure. And just her hind end is sticking out. They have forceps and they pull it apart. And then they inject the sperm. That's artificially inseminated queens.
Right, so that it'll be scientifically ideal, right?
And there's no celebration of, there's no orgasmic process that happens with it. It's just a procedure. And then the queens are raised in, there's about, maybe about 7 major queen bee breeders in the United States. And so I live in Washington State. And yet one of the big bee breeders is in Georgia. Well, Georgia has a really different weather system than Washington State does. And yet people around me buy queens from other parts, Hawaii. They buy queens from Southern California. They buy queens.
Because it sounds like the super ideal queen, right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. She lays more eggs than anybody. But those queens don't have the local knowledge. They aren't from around here. Honeybees didn't live in, they're European honeybees. They came over in the 15 and 1600s, but they've gradually moved into the different areas and they've adapted. That local knowledge is worth something here. If you take a bee I think Georgia's had a drought going for 7 or 8 years now. You bring one of those bees up here and you put it in the Pacific Northwest where it rains for 7 months, she's going to have a hard time from understanding what's going on. They're not local to here, and they don't have local knowledge.
Well, you don't need queens very often, do you? Your hives are making their own queens.
Ta-da! Yes. The fact is, if you don't do anything, the queen, that colony will create queens as needed. You know, you asked how long a queen lives. She lives 5, 6, 7 years. At the end of her life, her scent starts to reduce. And the bees are all very aware that she's reaching the end of her life. And so what they do is they do a process called supersedure. They take one egg that queen laid, and they'll turn it into a queen. And it'll just be up in the center of the hive, one queen, and this will be the daughter who hatches out. And there is no swarm that goes off in this case. This is an old queen at the end of her life. This new queen hatches out, and they do the sweetest thing. And I've seen this in my own hives probably 2 or 3 times now. The new queen hatches. I can tell there's a new queen coming, and she's a supersedure because she's not in the place where swarm cells are laid. Swarm cells are laid on the edge of the comb. A supersedure queen is right smack up in the top, in the middle of where everything's happening.
Right.
When she hatches out and goes and gets bred and comes back, often it's said that there's a duel to the finish, that these queens will attack each other. That isn't what I've seen. And I've had friends now who've seen this exact same thing. There's a very calm, peaceful transition of power. And this queen, one time I opened up the top of one of my hives, and there was a queen right on top of on the top of the bars. Yeah. And she ducked down between the frames, and I put the top back on real quickly, which is what I often do when I don't know what to do next. Like, just let me think that through for a minute. So I lifted it off, and she came up again, and then I could look at her, and I could see that her whole hind end, instead of having little soft hairs all over it, was worn shiny and clean. She had dipped her butt end down into a cell 1,000,000 times, and she'd worn all the hairs off of it. And she was an old queen, and they were letting her just live out her days in the hive. Someone will still feed her. She has no more tasks to do. She's retired.
Right.
And it's so sweet that there isn't this, this new queen has no reason to attack her mother. Right. It's just a beautiful transition. It's the way nature does it. And this old queen isn't chased out into the field to die in the rain. It's
she probably would be if it was humans, but not with an advanced species like that.
We take and pinch her and kill her, and off she goes.
Exactly. Incredible.
So there's this in there.
Wow. So the pollination value of bees to humans is obvious, but there's much more that they're doing while they're pollinating. So that's one line of investigation to do, to see what the real value is besides just what you could do with tweezers moving pollen from that flower to that flower. It's not restricted like that. But the other thing is making, bee farmers, beekeepers, they are taking, besides selling bees and queens and things like that, they're also taking out honey and pollen. So with what you know about the bees, that they're not just these little unconscious bugs moving around for humans to watch, is there any harmonious way to share any of the honey and pollen, or is that not a good idea from your current perspective?
In my early years, I harvested because that was what you did. And I after a few short years, I realized, well, first of all, conventionally, and even organically, people will take honey, take it out, and then they'll feed back sugar water or dry sugar.
Or they could take out what they think is excess, right, and then not need the sugar.
What I think is excess. Yes, and that's the premise, that it's excess. But when I've asked the bees about this, I got an interesting answer. And I was someone who did harvest every year. I didn't harvest from all my hives, but I would take from a few of them. And I tried to pay attention. One time I went up to harvest from one hive that looked like they had plenty of honey. And I got there and I just got this, no, that's not for you. Leave it alone. And I went, well, I guess I'm not harvesting honey. And on the way back, I walked by another hive and I got, but we have extra over here. And so I went and I took the box into the house with me, which I sometimes do, which my husband is never very appreciative of. But that particular day, I did bring it in because I only wanted to take like 3 bars out of it, 3 frames out of it. And then I put some back in and returned the rest of it. I didn't need more than that. Anyway, when you take honey away and feed sugar back, sugar is never, ever a good idea.
Right.
It's not the same pH. It has no nutrients. It has no nutrition to it. It's like eating candy bars.
Yeah,
in an emergency.
Food. Right.
Yeah, and in an emergency, yeah, maybe that'll save your life. But as a long-term menu item, no, that's not what bees are made for. It actually changes the pH value in their gut and makes them more prone to certain diseases like nosema, which is like bee diarrhea. It's not good for them in the long run. And it's such a common thing that people do this. But What the bees said, and the idea is that you're always taking the excess. So there's enough for the bees. Well, ideally, there should be enough honey for the bees for the winter. And if not, it's so common that beekeepers just feed honey, take honey and feed sugar instead.
Yeah.
But the sugar, what the bees explained to me was, we tend to think in an annual basis. We tend to think, oh, it's been a great year for gathering nectar and making honey. The bees were doing really well. There's lots of honey in the hive. I can take half the honey this year and leave them the other half. The next year, it's not such a great year. Maybe it rained too much and the bees couldn't get out and get the blossoms, and they only had a third as much honey the following year. Well, maybe that's a year that you don't take honey. But what the bees said is they prefer that they have a lot of honey left over. And, I started thinking of it in terms of how when we go to buy a house, we ask the bank, what's the most house I can afford?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Go by the maximum. Well, I got a job and I make this much money and I can pay my mortgage, so I can get this 6-bedroom house with 2 acres on it or something. And and yet then something happens. There's a recession, or there's who knows, something happens, and all of a sudden you lose the job. All of a sudden you're at great risk. I kind of think of it the same way with excess honey, that we as humans tend to live hand to mouth, year to year. We don't put a lot aside. We're not really good at preparing for the future as a rule. And the bees really are. So if they have a banner year with a lot of excess, they store that because they know that 2 or 3 years from now, this is going to be a really barren year, and that's going to pay off to have that in storage.
And honey lasts quite well for years, right?
Like thousands of years, thousands. It's a preservative. You could put something in honey and it will preserve it just like that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So ideally, it sounds like it's really not a perfect setup for humans to be taking honey out of beehives, right? I have less beehives now than I've ever had since I started keeping bees, because I've just changed my points of view on that. And one of them is that I don't take, and haven't for the last few years, taken any honey from any of my hives that are live hives. Every once in a while I have a hive that doesn't make it and dies, and I figure, and that's a hive I can take honey from. Right. So I have honey in my house, and it is from my bees, but it's from a failure hive, and that happens every once in a while. I had a failure last year, not because of anything that went wrong with my bees. We had forest fires, and the smoke came across, and we were in the path of smoke for about a solid month, and then 2 more weeks of wispy smoke. It happened in September, and what happened was the queen will not lay in times of imminent forest fire. So my bees didn't have any baby queens being laid in September, early October. Those bees would have hatched out and been the bees that
kind of got them through the winter. And all of a sudden in December, there was no hatch out. So
Right.
all of the hives went into winter very short-handed. And almost all of them didn't make it through the winter. There was a lot of honey in there when I opened them up. There were just so few bees because of something like a weather pattern like that. That was,
Right.
how could I have predicted that? It was interesting too, because my only hives that actually survived, not a one of them that was in a human-made hive structure survived. My bees that live in trees around here all survived.
Oh,
So
wow.
I've been shifting myself over to, I'm giving them more trees to live in. I'm much more happy about that.
So, well, I was just wondering if they're living in the trees, which is their normal habit, I think. That's not really set up for you to take any honey anyway, right?
You noticed that, huh?
Yeah. I don't think I've ever seen one.
I know. I've thought of that. I don't have any that are going to be, accessible in the near future. In some of the bee trees, we're just doing a class this weekend where we're hollowing out logs to put around so that bees have homes to be in. And you can take the bottom off and look up inside of it. And if you wanted to, you could break off a comb. I probably won't do that. You could, but I have enough. My bees over the years have given me enough honey, and it never goes bad, that I probably have a lifetime supply. I'm quite frugal with it. I don't put honey in my tea every day. I use it more like a sacred food.
Right.
I had a little spoonful of it just before I came to talk here because I wanted to be inspired by that. It's
perfect.
Like bringing me into communion with this. And
if people weren't using honey, and I didn't even ask you about harvesting pollen, how that's done, because that's sold on a big scale, as almost a superfood type thing. What happens when pollen is harvested out of a hive?
The way pollen is harvested is actually pretty interesting anyway. There's a little metal gate set up right at the entrance. And so when the bee goes to fit through, it has to actually kind of wiggle through a little wire entrance, and that scrapes the pollen off their legs. So they're bringing home pollen for us. They're bringing it home because pollen is baby food. That's what eat the babies. And so there's a little collector underneath, and all that pollen drops down, and then that's harvested and sold to humans. It's not the same thing that the bees are eating, however, because when the bee brings in that little pollen pack that she just got off the plant, she comes in and it's packed on her thighs. She's got little barbs that hold it on, and she's got a big, strong electromagnetic charge that actually holds it like static electricity, holding it in place. And when she comes inside the hive, another bee, a house bee, will come and take that pollen and put it in her mouth and carry it over and then empty it, spit it out into a cell. What happens is that she's got a little bit of that saliva that has a lot of DNA information as well, starts a fermentation process. And so she packs that into a cell, and then some more comes in and gets packed in and is wet with saliva. And that fermentation process actually breaks down the pollen. The grain of pollen is too big for a baby to eat. When it breaks it down by fermentation, then there's a number of things that happen. It's a different process, it's a different food, but it also introduces to the baby bee what lives inside the adult bee when that bee put it in her mouth and mixed it with her saliva.
Right.
And I know in primitive tribes, that's how baby food is made. The mother chews up the food and takes it and feeds it to the baby. So it's Gerber baby food. It's not coming out of a can, a jar. It's actually got all the enzymes, and the DNA information is transferred from here to the
all those primitive tribes don't understand that you have to sterilize the world to stay healthy and safe.
Isn't that interesting? So the pollen that when we buy pollen at the health food store that hasn't been processed by bees yet. I don't know. I have I have really very mixed feelings about that. Again, I'm in the divine position of if I have a hive that fails, there's some fermented pollen in there, and I can take that out. I often put it out for my other bees, but they really don't want it. I don't know why, they're just not interested. So I keep it in my freezer and put it in a smoothie every once in a while.
Well, if the bees don't get enough pollen into the hive, then that must impact their ability to have the babies survive. Right?
Yes, absolutely true.
And you said there were a few survivor bees in the wiped out hive where you took the honey out after the smoke, right?
Yes, there were no survivor bees in those.
Oh, there weren't. I thought you said there were only a few or something.
I have my tree hives are the ones that survived, but my wooden hives, no, nobody made it. And it's interesting because where I live, the whole line from 20 miles north of me to 40, 50 miles south of me, we all lost our bees. It was something that just because of our local.
So what did you do? Just wait for them to build up again, or did you get new ones from somewhere, or what?
That's the process I'm in right now. I've had so many, my original bees, they're all children of the bees I had in the first few years. So I could go gather some more swarms and bring them home. But frankly, I have hives that are still here. They're very strong. They'll put out swarms, and I'll just make more homes available for them. So they'll repopulate.
Right.
I always have to question myself about whose agenda am I on? Is it good for me to have more bees on my land, or is it good for the bees that I have more here? So I'll put out empty homes for them. And if they populate it, that's good. If they don't, I live with that. That's fine too.
What kind of empty homes?
Oh, right now we're making the logs, hollowing out the inside.
Okay.
Like a woodpecker went on a flurry of activity.
So you get like a section of a log and then make a big hole in the front of it and dig it out on the inside somehow?
It's about 3 feet high and about that big around.
Yeah.
And we chainsaw it out and then chisel it out and put a hat on it and put some legs on it underneath. And you can put them up in trees, or you can just build structures where they stand on the ground up there.
Okay,
and that's
but you make the hole all the way in from the top, right? Mm-hmm. And then you put a cover over it so that you can see inside if you need to.
Yeah, if I need to. And actually, you see inside from the bottom rather than the top.
Oh, okay.
You can look up. They're less disturbed by you looking from underneath than from the top.
Okay.
So, I'm not sure if even going to do that or just leave them be, because I never go in these tree hives at all. I could design them so I could, but I have just come to have so much joy at just their presence that I don't really need to see and do and touch and have all of those activities with them. They don't seem to seek it out from me, so why am I so presumptuous to think that I need to do that to them? So I'm just getting further and further away from any of the human models of what a beekeeper looks like and does.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so most of the people who are looking at bees and the reasons to have them around are either taking honey and pollen, like we just talked about, or what they're doing for what humans semi-consciously, I think, see as pollination. So looking at the pollination part, what does that really entail?
I'm actually more interested in that. I have a farm. Pollinate. If the bees are here and all they do is live their own lives and pollinate as they want, that's fine with me. I'm totally happy with that. And I think that's more the direction I'm going in. I don't really need the honey. I like having fruit that I know has been kissed by a bee.
Yeah.
The process, maybe that's really what it's supposed to be. Maybe we're not supposed to be taking their honey.
Yeah, it's an amazing concept that maybe it's actually for the bees. But,
yeah.
Now, the other issue that I think that's important is the commercial bee industry. If it's conventionally done, what are the things that are done in it besides what you've already talked about, like chemicals used, things like that, procedures used that are things to know about, reasons that you wouldn't want to buy that kind of honey anyway?
Yes, and yes. Everything is good. So first of all, bees are exposed to so many chemicals these days. I mean, they are the canary in the coal mine. It's really hard to get even an organic certification because a bee will fly off 2 miles away to nectar and pollen from trees, fruit trees. And when they do that and come back, I mean, how can I do that? I have an organic farm. I'm biodynamic. There are no chemicals on my land. But if they fly 4 doors away and, go to somebody else's house where they spray their roses to keep the aphids off, I've lost that. They did a study a few years ago where they took samples from all 49 states. They didn't do Alaska. And they were testing the wax that makes up the comb in there. And they were trying to analyze how many chemicals are these typical hives exposed to. And some of them were conventional, but they also took samples from organic beekeepers doing treatment-free, no chemicals whatsoever. And they found that, I'm not going to remember the exact number now, but it was something like the average hive had 26 different chemicals in it. I'm probably off on that number, but it was a chunk. That there was only one place, and it was a beekeeper who's down in the Southwest who keeps her bees out in the desert, so far from everyone. She was the only one that had no chemicals in her wax. Everywhere else, every single one they tested did have chemicals. And when you think of that, those baby eggs, for example, are laid in the wax. And there may be 20. I remember one statistic was that they had found a handful of them that had over 100 different kinds of chemicals in the wax. Over 100.
Wow.
You think
they're also selling that for people to eat too, aren't they? When they sell honeycomb, then you're supposed to eat the wax, I think. And
wax.
Right. But and what I wondered about that, about the honeycomb to eat, is that if it's made from frames that are put in there to start, it also includes whatever material the comb is built around, right? So you're eating that too, whatever it is.
Yeah. And I think just in general, the honey and the pollen were also sprayed. The flowers that came from, the nectar, it's been sprayed too. Hopefully it's not enough to actually kill the bees, but it is enough to do something. It's like, I don't like to eat food that has Roundup on it. We eat organic. Yeah. That takes a lot of diligence to not ever eat anything that's conventional. That's hard. And, we are pretty, we really tend to that a lot, but I would say I'm probably 99.7 on always eating organic. And then every once in a while I go have birthday cake at my neighbor's house, and it's like, yeah, okay. I just go cover it with love and we'll be okay. But I try to not be too fanatical. It's a funny thing to live in a culture where the other day we were driving home from somewhere. I said, I'm kind of hungry, but I can't think of anywhere to go where I know the quality of the food I get is something I actually want to put in my body. So we came home and made something. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, when you look honestly around, that's what you have to do.
Yeah. And when did it become okay for food to have poison on it? I think about that a lot. Like, why did we accept that, we can spray it with poison, but it won't harm you, when we know that's different?
I think part of it was certainly accelerated by the advent of chemical fertilizers, because when you use those on the plants, then the insects and disease know that that's an inferior plant that has to be removed. And so the chemical spray company says, look, obviously you have to put poison on your food or we'll all starve. And it was the fertilizer primarily.
I had a really good lesson in that, and you probably know this, but I'll say it anyway. Up in my compost piles, one spring I had a line of mustard that grew, and it grew like someone had rat-a-tat-tatted it. It just grew in a straight line down here. And I know what happened in the fall when I was cleaning up my garden. I took a big old stalk of mustard and I threw it on top of the pile, and it rolled down in the winter and seeds fell off in a row. Right. And it was so interesting because it was on the edge of my compost pile. It was growing up vibrant and beautiful and so healthy. And then I noticed that there were probably, 50 plants along here. And I noticed there were 2 plants that had aphids on them, just 2. And all the rest of them had no aphids whatsoever. Right. Now, probably an average person would just go pluck those out and throw them in the compost. But I like to understand things. I like to really figure out, why would 48 of these plants have no aphids and 2 have a lot of aphids? What happened? And I walked by that for days looking at it. And then I realized that these 2 plants were actually behind kind of the front row. So probably the 2 little seeds that were 2 5 seeds in front of them just kind of started growing. And then these germinated a little bit later back here. So they were kind of racing to get to the sun as these plants in the row were growing, which means you could actually see there was a qualitative difference in there. It was the mustard plant was a little reedier and a little more watery stemmed, and the leaves weren't as bushy, and it was racing to put all its energy into height rather than lushing itself out, because it was going to lose that sunblock there.
Right.
And from what I understand, that those 2 plants there, they were weak plants, and nature says, aphids, come do your task. We don't want these plants to have seed in the gene pool, and so please come and eat them.
Right.
So normally in farming, you have the complete opposite idea of that, which just, it's grow things, and if you have bugs, we'll go spray them with something, and not recognizing that they are in service of nature, saying only the strongest get to be in the gene pool.
Yeah, it's really true. And the other thing I've seen is that when the roots don't have the right drainage, or they run into solid rock or something like that, the bugs will usually try to remove those plants too.
Absolutely. Right. My neighbor she's about 200 feet away from where my compost in my garden is. And she's elderly, and she uses some chemicals over there. Not much, but she uses some. But every year she'll say, I've never seen the aphids so bad as they are now. And I'll think, she's 200 feet away from me and I have no aphids.
Exactly. Yeah, the aphids aren't stupid either. you know, what's really hard for humans to grasp is that life is conscious.
Yeah.
I mean, and I want to ask you a question. To take what you've explained about the bee spirit and apply it in other areas, because the same principles should apply everywhere. And, I've done a lot of experimenting with health and aging and food and different things that humans can do to try to figure out what our normal state is, because we got so far away from it. Even normal while we're in physical bodies, it could be really incredible compared to what we're used to in a lot of ways. And I was experimenting with little things like just eating raw food, for example, raw, organic, whole food. I've done that for a long time. And what I noticed is that if it was strictly vegan, either fruitarian or with the vegetables and herbs and stuff, but all raw, organic, that most of the people I met that were on that, their systems got kind of clean feeling, but they got light like birds, and too light, and no muscle mass, body heat was suffering, things like that. And once I experienced how much better the raw food is by orders of magnitude in a lot of its effects, I didn't want to go back to any cooked food, but it wasn't working. And the only thing that I found to really eliminate that problem completely without any cooked food, and to the point where I wasn't even caring about it anymore, was organic raw milk. And I got, because it has cholesterol and saturated fat, which you desperately need, and that's why the government says they'll kill you, because they're really good. And that whole twisted, things that we learn that are usually the opposite of what we're told. But, and I had to learn exactly how to use it and everything, how it went together, but it fit into the age reversal program that I was working on. Really interesting.
That makes a lot of sense me too, because we're a farm, and we have had dairy cows and dairy goats, and obviously we were drinking the milk and raw.
Yeah, exactly. And usually the raw milk organizations, Weston Price and people like that, and I've talked to their president and different people in them, they understand, and they're really obsessive, like me, about that the milk has to be raw or it's not even good for you in any form. It can't be heated above body temperature, but they don't understand. Because
my cats won't drink milk. I've had someone comes and they have some milk, and my cats will not drink it.
There have been experiments.
That's the raw milk. Yeah.
There's no life form in nature that uses cooked food except people, and it's been written about thousands of year old documents. But my question, and with like Weston Price, they totally understand that for milk. They totally are oblivious to it for anything else. And they see no problem with cooking everything else in general. But my question was not that, but if you're going to apply the same consideration that you do with the bees, that eventually led you not even to take honey unless there's a abandoned hive or something. With the milk, it appears that you can, if you're modest in your requirements, there's plenty to share with the babies, because they do like the sugar water thing with the bees. They take the baby away, feed them artificial formula full of chemicals and garbage, and take all the milk for the humans from the animal. So you don't have to do that. You can give plenty to the baby, and there's enough for humans after that, or along with that. But my question was, once I start... That's
exactly what we've done, how we've raised our cows, by the way. What you're saying, that our cow has a calf, and we actually leave the calf on the cow, which most farmers do. And we just, if we want milk, which every day we would milk once, we don't need to milk more than that. And then we just have, we would separate the cow from the calf for a few hours, just on the other side of the fence, not a true separation. And then there's enough to take just what we need. I wonder sometimes, I'm cutting into what you're saying, but it's one of the big questions I have.
Yeah.
So I figured a way for me to have sufficient honey and sufficient raw milk. I don't know how to say that on a global scale, though. When we get into global scales, we start talking about monocultures, and I know those are bad.
And it has to be answered globally if it's going to make sense. But before we get to that step, the question I wanted to ask you, just to get your impression, is that, with insects, with animals, with any life form, you start getting enough consciousness, and there's a certain point you get to where you do not want to cause harm or pain or destruction to anything. Yes. It's not because you read it in a book, and this is the rules, to be a good follower of your philosophy or religion, you should do. It's not anything like that. It's that you look into that being and you realize your connection, and it's like you don't want to hurt yourself if you're not, mentally sick. And that becomes an extension of yourself. So you don't want to hurt that either. It's not a reasoning process. It's obvious. So my question and that's one of the main reasons I starting in 1970, stopped using what they call meat, flesh out of killed animals. I don't have any interest in it anymore, but that's originally why I didn't want to use it. But with cows or goats or camels in the desert, which are the main sources of milk, I thought, about 5,000 years ago when Krishna was walking around, or other teachers who had some spiritual insight, or even Jesus talked about raw milk, and it never got into the Bible, but he taught all about that kind of stuff in the Essene period. And they were not killing the animals. So in modern times, all these humane dairies are killing all the animals or letting somebody else do it. They're not humane at all. I mean, if you were the animal and your owner said, what would be a humane way to kill you, you probably wouldn't come up with a good one. And there isn't one, that's why. So, but these humane dairies are taking really good care of them, and then they either kill them themselves or they give them to somebody else who will. It's for the males, because they only need a few, and it's for the cows or the goats when they don't give enough milk anymore. So I thought, all right, there's got to be an old, better model of dairy farming if milk is really great to use, which I found out it is. And it's been recommended by some really amazing teachers thousands of years ago. And so if you're going to do that in a way that's really humane, like they make believe they are now, how do you do it? And I called Hindu temples all over the world, all these old traditions that came from the old, wiser people that used to do it differently. None of them remember anything. They're totally oblivious to it. But it does exist, and I'm looking for it because I want to make it part of the school that we're building for all these things together. And one element of it is there are breeds of cows and goats and other animals that don't need to be bred every year, and they still give milk. That changes the math of it. But something like that has to be worked out, and then that can be an element of what you said. How do you make it global? And one thing is that small farming does produce a lot more food per acre than these giant chemical farms, and that those aren't food anyway. So there may be ways to do it.
I'm glad you're having that conversation because it's something I think about a great deal, about how do you have a diet that I believe that when there's harm put on any being, that harm, and then you ingest it, that there's something that happens in you too. And if you can have a diet that has no harm, and there's something energetically that happens that's different. And I know having a farm, we're very aware of that we raise our animals in such a way that every day is a good day. And I think about things like, what are the things that don't have harm in them? If I have to, and I don't have any answers. This is just stuff I'm thinking about. I think if dig up something by its root, then I just killed that plant. If I have to harvest it a certain way that causes the plant harm, I'm not sure I can say I'm free of it. But if I take an apple as a piece of fruit, there's no harm in that because the tree carries on. So I wonder a lot about that. Milk is the same way.
Milk, I was going to say that. Milk is the same way. And if it didn't hurt the bees, honey's the same way too. It's one of the only things that's produced only to be eaten. It has no other purpose.
Yeah. So I'm kind of in the middle of that, and I don't have an answer for it, but it's a really big question that I think about near daily, trying to figure out what is the diet that I want to go on based on what I feel like when I eat food, but also understanding the emotional and the spiritual ramifications of the food source itself.
Yeah, because what you're really trying to do is open up self-awareness to who you really are while you're still here. And everything you do, including what you eat, affects that. So if you could eat one piece of fruit a day and be super healthy, that would solve your problem, and also world hunger and everything else. But I've tried it, and I've met the few other long-term fruitarians. They don't look very good to me. And I think there's something about our current condition that makes it really hard to be super strong and healthy on a couple of pieces of fruit a day. So I'm looking, how close could you get to that? And what do you have to change in other aspects of your life in order to really make use of it? And so far, I haven't been able to get away from raw milk.
Yeah.
That seems to be an element of it.
It's really good questions.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's the same principles. And I think, some of us are going to help each other discover this stuff. And what's interesting is in the beginning, you think, oh, if I don't eat this and this and this and whatever you're used to, TV dinners or whatever it is, or Cokes all day, then I'm going to be really deprived. And what came up with that I found is that if you revolutionize how you relate to mind, you don't have the same feeling. And you get more enjoyment and satisfaction out of what you change to that you thought would be really deprived than you ever got eating all the stuff you ate before. You didn't even really feel very good.
Yeah.
New frontiers, I guess.
Good conversation. That's I'm always seeking like what carries my evolution, our evolution forward.
Yeah.
How do we participate in ways that don't create harm, that create harmony?
Exactly. It seems like a simple question, but it's like every second of your life has to be looked at. Total consciousness. But I mean, I don't mean to divert us onto that stuff, but I just thought it's what you're talking about since the beginning. It's this gigantic concept of harmony. So if we wanted to kind of leave people with an invitation to explore this further, what would you like them to remember from this whole conversation?
I mean, I really think the first thing that popped into my head was live with kindness in your heart. That's right. That, and I think that's one of the things that I talk about in my book a lot, about the kindness that we bring it to our relationship with bees, which just happens to be the place that I have some knowledge. And if we can do that in all different areas of life, what a magnificent world we could be creating. I think a lot of us are doing that, and I'm really happy for that.
Yeah, me too. I think this is an ongoing investigation, and hopefully we can do more chapters if you have time in the future. It would be fun.
Yeah. Do you want me to show you the cover of my book?
Yeah, I'd like you to talk about it, how people can get it, and what's in it.
Okay. It's actually, this is my copy of the book. It has a very beautiful cover. It's gorgeous and all that.
Wow.
But
Nice.
all these things is where I'm referring to all the different chapters that are in it.
Okay.
It's called of Increase and Listening to the Wisdom of Honeybees for Kinder Beekeeping and a Better World. I think that's a good place to start. And it's actually, it just came out in Dutch.
Wow. Neat.
It came out in French, and it's in an audiobook, and it's coming out next in, I think Spanish is the next language it'll come out in. And then there's a few more. I know they're working on German and Greek, I think, is after that. So
wow.
It's making its way around the world, which is sort of an amazing thing for me to know. I actually wrote it, and I never fantasized about what if it did this. It was just, I wrote it in service of what I was being asked to do. And then it just kind of went far and is still going far.
It looks beautiful. I wish I had read it before we talked, but I'll have to get a copy of it right away. I'd really like to. And can people buy it on your website?
Yeah, you can buy it at any bookstore. You can go online. Okay. Whoever you'd like to support. Small bookstores can order it. Okay. Amazon has it. Probably my publisher is a good place. Sounds True. Sounds True is the publishing house.
Is that a site? Like a website or something?
SoundsTrue.com. Yeah.
Okay. SOUNDSTRUE.com. All right. And what about what's on your site?
My website I just redid the website, so I'm in the process of porting over a lot of my blogs and stuff. There's a whole lot of different things about how I care for my bees, and a fairly active blog. And there's also a nonprofit that I started called Preservation Beekeeping. Okay. That I co-founded it with my friend Susan Nylans, who's also an author. We started that 2 years ago, and that's preservationbeekeeping.com. And that's sort of more on an international level about all of us who in all different countries around the world are doing things like what I've talked about today in caring for bees and making the world a more hospitable and kind environment for them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a big part of that is phasing out chemical agriculture, actually, right?
Phasing out chemicals, getting rid of monocultures would be a big step in the right direction.
Right.
And having an awareness of kindness in all actions that we do.
I think for the big farmers who are understandably concerned about losing all their income, it would be good if there was a demonstration big farm showing and really keeping track of the economics and what money they made, how you can keep your income by selling actual good food instead of poison and not lose from the transition. And then they wouldn't be so scared to try it, you know.
Yeah. And I hear that all over the place. I hear people who say, as a matter of fact, I know a beekeeper that's local to me who's been conventional for years, long decades. And 2-3 years ago, I was talking to him and he said, I went organic. And I was like, really? You? I mean, we used to go head to head a bit there. He said, yep, I did. And he said, I sent my bees down to pollinate the almond orchards. And he said, every year I was less and less of them were surviving when they came home. They were dying off. So much exposure to chemicals and diseases. And he said, last year, I lost 100% of them. Lost all of them.
Perfect time to transition, isn't it?
Yeah, he said, that's not sustainable. I can't just keep buying more bees every year. And he said, so I'm organic now. And I was incredulous. And I said, I'm really impressed that you did that. And he said, and don't you tell a single person about it either. Because he said, I don't want my friends making fun of me. And so I haven't said his name, but but I know that he's organic. It's his third year now, and he's doing pretty well at it. Good. But it was so interesting that the peer pressure of his friends would make fun of him if they knew that he had gone organic on them. But I think over time, this is going to happen with more of his friends too.
So how did he do? Did he have to move to the wilderness or something? How could he do it?
He actually put them way out, way far from where he and we live, and in a place where they're just not going to have a lot of connection, a lot of contact with other bees. Okay. So he really thought it through.
Wow, that's exciting.
Yeah, it is. It's watching the terrain is changing, and people are recognizing that the things that used to work before, maybe they aren't so smart after all.
Yeah, incredible. It's very hopeful. So I think, somebody has to demonstrate that these things are economically viable. There's a newspaper that you might have heard of called Acres USA. And
oh, yeah.
I've read it since the 70s. I met Charles Walters at that time, and who I don't think is alive anymore, and when they were in Kansas City. And he had the idea to combine economics and environmental, consciousness, so that you could make it profitable to do things that were really good like that. I think that was a good idea.
Yeah. When we first got our farm and we didn't know much about, we were starting to eat organically, and then we just decided we're just going to go organic. We never used chemicals on our farm anyway, but we had a very small garden back then. Right. And we just devoured the copies of Acres. Yeah. We were just looking for who knows what we want to know.
Still available there in Colorado now. Yeah. And their general manager is going to be on the show in the next couple of weeks, I think.
Oh, that's great. Good magazine.
Yeah, it is. Okay, well, I hope everybody's really paid attention, and you guys should listen to this more than once if you need to, because this is a rare opportunity to get inspiration from somebody like Jacqueline has been giving you. And I hope you can make good use of it and take it further and let us all know where it goes. It should be fun. So thanks for visiting, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks.
Okay, guys, that was Jacqueline Freeman. I hope you liked that. That was incredible. And I just feel really fortunate to meet people like this. I mean, most of them I never would talk to if it wasn't for this Lost Arts project. So I hope you're enjoying it too. She was recommended by Celeste, the guest from last week, who was great too. And I recommend that you go back and listen to that if you didn't get a chance. This seemed to be a talk about bees, and it was, but it was also a talk about consciousness, which is, to me, in a way, the whole subject of everything, because whatever else happens, it comes out of that. And the issues in the world, these little issues of everybody trying to kill each other, and even the global rulers involved in seriously intending to exterminate all life on the planet, which we've talked about before. You may know about that. That's really what they intend to do. It's not just population reduction. That's what some of their upper levels believe, but above that, they know what it's about. So the honeybees are like Jacqueline said, the canary in the coal mine in one sense, that they're being wiped out. Should be a little bit of a warning, right? That life is on its way out, and it's up to us to turn it around. And I don't think, I support the work of whatever, letting people be educated about chemtrails or agricultural poison or nuclear power or whatever, Wi-Fi and all the 5G stuff. That's not just stupidity, although it is maybe on the corporate levels, but on the upper levels, it's intentional. And the reason I suggest people understand and absorb that is not to feel bad. There's no benefit in feeling bad at all, in my opinion. I'm not one of those guys that is saying, you got to get mad as hell and you're not going to take it. That's not really how to open up your potential, because you get mad at hell and you just burn yourself out. And the people trying to destroy you have a lot of help from you. And I don't think that's a very good plan. And it also puts you in a state where you can't have any idea what people like Jacqueline are talking about. And to open up that degree of perception and really self-awareness, which is what leads to awareness of everything else, not awareness of your personality level self so much, although that's good too, but what's behind that. Because the same thing behind that is behind everything else. And even the people who are intentionally planning to exterminate life on this planet, including the bees and us and everybody, underneath their programming is also the same thing as is in us. Contrary to popular opinion, our objective is not to destroy them and throw them in hell forever or wherever they're supposed to go. Whatever you wish for somebody else, you're actually wishing for yourself. So you can brush that off as nonsense, but if you really absorb it and realize the power of it, that's where we could remake things, but not without consciousness. So the value of somebody like Jacqueline Freeman and so many of the other great people that visit us here is that they're a reminder, if you're open enough to receive it, that the hidden power point is inside you, not other people, but you, and not what you are going to take out and try to debate or convince or argue with somebody to come over to your correct point of view and see that they're wrong. That's another way to just burn up all your energy. If you become what you are, which is what we're all trying to do, the effect that you have on somebody else is massively more than any perfect argument you could ever think of. And most people will just brush that off for their whole lives, and hopefully you're not one of those. And you actually look at it. And that's the value to me of people like Jacqueline. It's not just the words, the words are like the carrier wave of the real message, which is the energy, the frequency, the consciousness, the feeling, the perception. Not because it's in her and she's the great person doing all this, what she is, but it's because you are. So that's what I encourage people to absorb and benefit from her presentation today. And if you want a supportive, interactive environment to work on that consciously with other people interested in the same thing, check out planetaryhealingclub.com. That's our project to try to give ourselves a somewhat more secure platform to literally talk about this stuff without any barriers on what we can say, without worrying about being censored, which we always have to be conscious of on the public platforms. But those are still valuable because we can reach you, and you're the person we're trying to get this to. But on the private one, planetaryhealingclub.com leads to it. It's actually a different type of platform. Interactive, live every week. I'm there every week giving the time because I think that you're the person that everybody's been waiting for, and that if you're willing to take that responsibility, then there's no limit to what you can actually accomplish. If you want to be a healing influence on the world, you have this massive power to do it. It's not a belief or a theory or a religion or something you memorize. It's really there. But it takes some work to actually do it. And people like Jacqueline are a reminder of the very edge of the beginning of it, of where you can actually go. So it's an invitation. If you want to see other things that we're doing, look at lostartsradio.com and see what else you can. We have a Facebook channel under a Facebook page under Lost Arts Radio. You can always email in suggestions and comments and feedback and whatever you want, richard@lostartsradio.com. And so far I read all of them and will respond when possible. I'm doing that pretty often too. But our thought is that the Planetary Healing Club is a membership site where you can get in and start the work in a group that's supportive, trying to do the same thing. You can learn about the forbidden health information that we are never supposed to find out. And I'll share a lot of that with you that I'm familiar with because I've been working on it since the 1960s, about reversing aging and getting your health back. But that's just step one. That just makes it easier to get into the consciousness work, which is where the real power lies. So if you want to, I'm trying to reach those people. I think it's probably like 1 out of 1,000 in the general population that has a desire to get more deeply into those things and really do the work, because it's not an ego thing, or it's not something where you're preparing yourself to go out and just tell other people what to do. It's not like that. It's like if you change your own self-awareness, you become something else, which is who you are now, but with awareness. And by resonance, which is what Tesla talked about, you have the power to change the whole rest of the biosphere, and including the humans. And that's exciting, and it's what you're never supposed to find out. So it'd be nice to meet you there on Saturdays if you get a chance. Otherwise, I keep putting out as many of the free videos with Doug's help on all the major platforms like YouTube and Facebook and all the others, as long as we're allowed to. And if we get censored, if and when we get censored off those when they realize what we're talking about, then you can still, I think, find us on brighteon.com, BRIGHTEON, like bright eon, that means new time, brighteon.com. Mike's great new non-censoring site, or just keep up with us at lostartsradio.com. So that's it for our show for Sunday. I hope you get to see it at some point. You may be watching the archive. Really appreciate your being there. We're doing this together, and we look forward to seeing you next time.